Aloha and welcome to this screencast on using views using the Play framework. And this is kind of exciting because in previous screencasts we've looked at the model, we've also looked at the controller. Now we're looking at the final part of the Play framework, the view, and that completes the model view controller architecture design pattern. So you're going to get a real sense for how kind of modern web applications are constructed once you come through this this section. So the view is really simple. The view is basically what's going to be presented to the user, and it's implemented in Play via this set of HTML files that actually contain Scala code. So they're compiled. That means that you pass arguments, you have kind of a parameter list that you pass into them explicitly, and they get compiled when you do a test or a run or a compile inside your Play terminal session. Obviously in Eclipse, well, not obviously in Eclipse, but in Eclipse without a fair amount of finagling, you can't get Eclipse to actually automatically compile the Scala code. At least I haven't been able to do that reliably yet. So the way that when you edit these scala.html files, the way that you get them actually compiled is by using the Play console. Now what's going to happen when you initially create these views is that Eclipse is going to go crazy because it's going to be wanting to look for code that it doesn't know about yet. And so what I've found in my Eclipse is to simply go to the Play console, type compile or test or run anything to kind of get the Scala code to compile, and then if you refresh inside your Eclipse browser, then all the problems go away. Maybe we'll see that. Okay, so in creating the view, I'm going to kind of talk about four main things in this screencast. One is how you integrate Twitter Bootstrap 2.0 into your Play application. This idea of having a main template which is going to extract out or refactor out the code required for doing the header, footer, the stuff that's constant throughout your application. And then how you go back and forth between Divi Shot and Play when doing development. I found that actually doing the mock-up in Divi Shot first and being able to kind of look at the HTML you use to construct the mock-up and then compare that to what Play is generating is a really helpful way of kind of making sure that you're doing what you think you're doing. And then finally I'm going to talk about testing the view. For that I'm going to show you this thing called the page object pattern, which is a nice way of structuring your code, your test code, so that it's more easy to understand and maintainable. I've created, and then you'll be seeing that I've got this application warehouse management system that I've created. You'll be able to access that code and play around with it, and hopefully by using that example you'll be able to create your view without a lot of problems. So let's go into a little bit more detail. I just kind of want to outline the steps for these various things at the beginning so that you're not lost as you're going through it and you can go back and refer to this. For integrating with Bootstrap 2.0, it's very simple once you understand what to do. Basically, you're going to edit your build.sbt file in order to retrieve the whatever version of Twitter Bootstrap you want. We're going to use this utility called WebJars, which makes it real simple. There's other ways to do it. You could download Twitter Bootstrap and put it into the CSS subdirectory yourself, but I like this because it makes it simpler to update versions of Bootstrap, and also it's a general paradigm for downloading and installing any kind of thing that you want. Second thing is you need to edit your header area of your files to include the Twitter Bootstrap CSS code that you've downloaded. Then there's this fairly unintuitive step, which is that the way that Twitter Bootstrap wants to see your CSS laid out and even your form components and controls laid out, you have to kind of tell the @form helper inside of Play how to do that, and there's this two-step process for doing that, which is to define this Twitter Bootstrap input.scala.html file, and then you import it in your pages and make it what's called the implicit field constructor. And if you do that, and I'll show you code that does it, then what happens is when you have this @form kind of macro that you call in Play to create your forms, the forms will then be generated with the right kind of code around the form elements to make them all display nicely in Twitter Bootstrap 2.0. Okay, Next is playing with Divi Shot. As I said before, I think this is a really important step to keep you from being, getting confused. If you do your mockups in Divi Shot first and see what the HTML, your kind of target HTML should look like, then when you're doing your design, your development with Play, you can basically render the page in Play by doing run and then going to localhost 9000, and then do one of these view source to see what the HTML code is that you generated via running your Play application, and then you can go back and compare that to your Divi Shot to see if things are the way they should be. And I think that's, things are a little mysterious when you call this @form macro. It's not going to look anything like HTML at that point in time, as you'll see. So you're going to kind of wonder, what the heck is this thing producing? And the simplest way to figure it out is just basically view the source after you run the application, and then you can go back to Divi Shot and see if it's what you wanted. Finally, there's this @main template, or second to find, penultimately, there's this @main template that I said before is a standard kind of design pattern in Play, so that you can put all your header stuff and your nav bar and the junk that's going to be the same in all of the pages into one place, and then you kind of invoke that main template from the specific page code. And I'll show you that as we go. Testing. There's this nice thing called the page object pattern, which comes as part of this Fluent Lenium package that's got nice integration with Play and a fair amount of documentation. And as you'll see, you basically define a Fluent Lenium, or a Fluent page, corresponding to each page, each of your Scala.html pages, and then inside that class definition, you're going to write code that explains how to go to that page and how to fill out forms in that page and manipulate that page in any way you want to. And then that makes your tests much easier, because the tests read very obviously. You're going to kind of retrieve this page, and then you're going to do this kind of operation on it, and then you should be at this other page. And so it's pretty nice, and it makes your tests a lot more reusable as well. Okay, so let's go to the demo. So let me get rid of PowerPoint. And I think the first thing I want to show you is if we go, so I've downloaded this WMS application, our warehouse management application that we've been working on, for the past month or so. And so if I go and retrieve localhost 9000, which is the home page, here's what it currently looks like. So comes up, it's got a simple nav bar, and actually no subpages defined, and it will list all of the warehouses, all the products, and all the stock items that are currently defined in the page. And as you can see, there aren't any pages, aren't any of these objects defined, so we can go ahead and click a button to create one. And the way I've actually basically designed this sample system is to fill in the fields, because it's such a pain to actually have to type all this every time you're testing. So just for development purposes, I create this warehouse page with predefined values, so I can just click the create button, and then you can see that we have a warehouse, and then I can click that and then retrieve it, and now instead of having this create button at the bottom, I can update it, delete it, or do nothing at all. So for example, if I decide I want to change the ID, this is not the primary key, by the way, this is just the kind of the ID that we're going to use, and click update. Now you can see that we still have just one instance of a warehouse, but it's got this different ID. Going to the product page, something very, very similar. We've got an ID, we've got the name, got the description. I'll create one of those, and then because of that, I can now go to the stock items page. And the way I've got the stock items page defined right now is we have to define a product in a warehouse that it's associated with, and it will create a pull-down menu with all of the currently defined products and warehouses. So we can now create one of these suckers, and you can see that we've now got a product. Now what's interesting, a little kind of little bit of usability in the system is that when you go back to looking at a product, if there is a stock item associated with it, it's going to list that. And in fact, we could create more stock item, and as you see this little thing, there's that's a read-only field. You can't actually edit anything in there, so it's just a display of the stock items. And just for grins, let's try deleting it. And what you'll find when we delete it, we go back. There's no verification or confirmation dialog, right? You better be sure in this system when you delete something you really want to do it. So we've deleted the products, and because you can't have a stock item without associated product, we also implicitly delete the stock item. Okay. What else do I want to tell you? I think that's basically all you need to know about how the system works, right? We've got this, new thing. So I'll create another one of these, and then once I've got that, I can make stock items. I could, change the quantity. I can create one. I can go back and change it to this, and everything's good. You may not believe me, so I'll click on that, and you can see, yes, everything's good. Then, of course, I can delete a stock item, and deleting a stock item does not delete the corresponding product in warehouse. Okay. Okay, so that's what that application looks like. Now let's go through and look at the code that's produced it. I'll do a little code walkthrough. Where is my code? Here it is. Okay. So let's start off, and I'll give you kind of a top-level overview of the system. What you'll find is that we have controllers, and we're going to have a controllers for application, product, stock item, tag, and warehouse. The application controller is basically just going to bring up that home page. Okay, and so what you can see is that it basically retrieves all of the existing warehouse's products and stock items and then displays them. Now that's not very scalable for a real live warehouse system, which might have millions of stock items. Like, God forbid you'd want to do this in Amazon. You wouldn't want to do that, but you could easily imagine changing this to have some kind of search as opposed to just simply displaying everything that's defined. But for the simple purposes of understanding how Play works, I think this is a reasonable user interface, and might be reasonable in other circumstances as well, when you just have a small, less than 100 or so items that you're going to be retrieving. Now in the we did have tags in our basic underlying model. I did not implement tags at this point in this application, mainly just because I wanted to kind of reduce the amount of code that you had to wade through. So at some point I may go add in tags just to flesh it out. But it's just to, if you're wondering why you didn't notice another screen on the home page to create tags and so forth, it's just because it seemed kind of redundant to have that. So I think you can get the flavor of things without dealing with tags. So the application, that's just our home page, and then we have a controller associated with our 4 different things. We have models associated with our 4 different things. That's fairly unchanged from before. And then we have views, and what you can see here is that we have this main, that's our template that'll have our header in that. We have this index, which will turn out to be kind of our home page. And then we have pairs of pages for each of those subpages. One page which will be used to display the page when you want to create a new item, and one that's used to display the page when you want to edit it. I've separated them out into 2 pieces. That's not strictly necessary. You can use a little bit more Scala magic to combine these together, but I felt that for kind of understanding how things work, it makes it hopefully a little simpler for you to understand, to see this split out this way. It does result in a little bit of redundant code, or redundant code inside each of these files, which is kind of the trade-off. Then we're going to have this Twitter Bootstrap helper, useful for 2.0. And then we have our test package, and there we'll have tests for the controller, tests for the model, and tests for the view. I think that's kind of a nice subdivision there. And then, as I said before, we have corresponding to each of our Scala.html pages, except for the main one. You're going to see that we've created these fluent pages. So product.create.scala.html has a product create page, product edit has a product edit page, and basically these are all kind of ways within our test framework that we can retrieve and manipulate any of these corresponding Scala.html files. Okay, and then you'll see that actually in our view test, that's when we're going to actually be manipulating these instances. Okay, so that's a brief overview of the system. What I want to do now is launch into how Twitter Bootstrap 2.0 is integrated. Okay, and it's pretty straightforward. The first thing we want to go is to project build.scala. And what you can see is you're just gonna edit this app dependencies to include, first of all, downloading of this WebJars application. And that's, you can almost kind of think of this like Maven, the way Maven will implicitly download dependencies for you and so forth. So we get this WebJars application download, and then once we have that, we can use WebJars to actually get the Bootstrap application. And we're going to get version 2.3.1 of Bootstrap. Okay? So having done that, the next thing that we're going to want to do is actually include that in all of our files. And the way we do that is we go to this our main.scala.html, which is, as I told you before, that's kind of the template which was going to define the stuff that's constant for each page, and of course the head section is going to be constant for each page. And so what we're going to do is we're going to include the following two link elements. And I think, I highly recommend that you just download the WMS application and just cut and paste this code into your own. There's nothing that's going to be any different. Basically, it's saying that we're going to go use this. Well, actually, we're going to go get the CSS bootstrap.min CS using the WebJar assets routing, and we're going to include any of our own customizations from the main.css. This reminds me that there's another thing we have to do actually, which is provide this particular additional line in our controller, because the WebJars application, what it will do is it will download any libraries that you want that are defined for the WebJars site and put it into this special location in the application under the WebJars directory. And then it will also define for you a special controller which you can use to access those files wherever you want. And basically the place where you're always going to want to access them is up here in the header, and so you get this WebJar assets controller defined for you. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward, I think, with respect to the header. Now the next thing is the whole problem of the layout of forms. And so actually what I'll do is I'll go to, if we go to Divi Shot, let's go to Divi Shot. And hopefully this will, okay, and as you've been playing around with with Divi Shot this past week, you'll see that, to have something kind of laid out this way, what you'll find is that within a form, you need to have a control group that needs to have a label with control label, and then you have this div class controls, and you kind of have this standard way of laying out elements in a form in order to have things display correctly in Twitter Bootstrap. And unfortunately, by default, Play doesn't understand how Twitter Bootstrap would like to have a form element laid out. And so what we're doing in this next kind of segment is teaching Play how to lay out a form element in the correct way. And the reason why this is needed by Play is that when you actually look at the definition of a page, so this is our create product page, what you see is we have this @form kind of Scala invocation where we pass into it. Here's kind of the arguments to the @form, okay, and then here's the body. All right, so just kind of like the way the main is going to take content and which is the body and provide the header and so forth. We're doing that same thing right here. Is we're going to invoke this form kind of macro, I think you can think of it as, which is going to expand into the actual HTML. And in fact, maybe it's helpful to go here. Let's create a new product, okay, and then if I say view source, okay, what you can see is we've got to get, here's our form starting here, okay, and there's the class form horizontal. And then inside we got to have these div control groups with labels and div class equals controls, and you can see that that actually looks pretty similar to the way, you know, I mean there's some new lines in there that shouldn't be in there, but you know it's got the same basic structure as in our Div Shot. But how would Play actually know that we're even using Div Shot and that we actually want to have our form elements laid out that way, when actually in the actual code that we're writing we don't say anything about those divs and the labels and the blah blah blah. We're just saying, look, we want an input text form item, and it's going to have this ID and, you know, blah 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 blah. Okay, so the way we're going to do that is in two pieces. The first thing is I create a subdirectory inside the views package called helper, and I'm going to cut and paste this code in. I didn't write this code myself. I got it off the internet by somebody else who'd figured out how to integrate Play with Twitter Bootstrap 2.0. And what you can see here is basically this is the set of divs. You can look at this and kind of even, you know, fairly easily understand that this is essentially a macro which is going to expand into the right HTML associated for Twitter Bootstrap 2.0. The problem is that you also need some way in which, whoops, let me go back to here, in which to tell tell Play that when it invokes this @input text macro, it's got to actually use this Twitter Bootstrap definition that we have here. And the way we do that is by including these two lines here. We have an import helper, which is going to tell it, you can look down here, and then we have this basically assignment, which is to say that for each form, whenever Play is trying to lay out a form element, it's going to want to have, it's going to use a field constructor, and it has a default one which is not correct for Twitter Bootstrap 2.0. So we're going to tell Play that the default field constructor that it should use for forms is not whatever it, you know, comes with out of the box, but is in fact the one that we're defining down here, Twitter Bootstrap input. Okay, and once we have that, then when you try to, when Play is processing this form definition, it's going to refer to this code in order to understand how to, you know, generate the HTML associated with an input text or whatever. Okay, and this works most of the time. It turns out that you'll see that when we want to do the actual input right here, okay, there I just include the HTML for Twitter Bootstrap in the correct format directly, and Play isn't going to do anything with it, because you see we're not calling one of these macros here. We're just using regular old HTML with the, you know, the regular old stuff. Okay, so that I think is good enough to that should be enough information for you to incorporate Twitter Bootstrap 2.0 into your own application. You're going to have to edit the build.scala. You're going to have to edit the routes file so that WebJar's path is included, and then you're going to edit the main.scala so that you can actually refer to it, and then you're going to add this Twitter Bootstrap input scala.html file, and then finally when you're actually doing anything that involves forms that you want to wrap with this special HTML, then you just include these two pages. Okay? So kind of sounds like a lot, but it's mostly just kind of one-time stuff. It's just kind of part of the setup, and you know, I found it pretty straightforward. I didn't really make, there wasn't too much of a mistake that was made, that I made anyway while I was doing it. Okay, so that's the Twitter Bootstrap 2.0. So let's just kind of take a look at the other things. What you can see is that the routes file, this is something to look at least for this application. What we're doing is changing the defining routes so that for each kind of page, we have a create page and we have an edit page. Well, we have a create page. This will actually be when you want to see the create page. We're going to, this will be the URL that you use, and then we're going to use this controller item warehouse.create. And so actually let's just kind of follow this through. So if we go to the controller, let's keep with product actually. They're all exactly the same if you look at them. Okay, so let's just keep looking at product. So if we want to create a new product, we're going to use this URL product/create, and that will invoke this controller here. So just to help things along, here we are. Let's cancel this. So we're at the home page, and we want to create a new product. So we're going to click this new product. Okay, now we're at this URL product/create. Okay, and if we look at the source of this page, what we can see is we have this button. Okay, well, it's a link. It's actually displayed as a button that says new product, and then the the href, sorry about that, the href for that is /product/create. Okay, and then we have this Twitter Bootstrap 2.0 stuff that makes it look good. Okay, so when we create this, we press this new product. That's going to take us through the controller, because so our routes file says when you click this, when someone invokes this, URL /product/create, which was invoked by clicking that button, Play is saying, okay, what I have to do is I have to now invoke this particular controller method in the product class called create. So let's go up here, and here's what we're actually invoking. Okay, and as I said before, I didn't like having to type everything out each time, so what I did was I created a default instance of a product, and then I created a form based upon our product model, and I filled it in with this data right here. Okay, and then I invoked the render method of the product.create view, which is this guy right here. Okay, and I passed into it this form that was pre-filled with the information. So when you look at this and I say new product, there's my form. It's filled in with my default information. Okay. Now this product.create, what that is that's an instance of this particular view. Remember that that this is a Scala file, so it gets compiled. We have a class that corresponds to this with instances, and so when we if we look at this, we can see that we are importing the views.html.product.create class, which is what was created by virtue of that Scala template being compiled, which is kind of a cool aspect of it. Okay, so we're going to render that particular Scala file. So let's look at that in a little more detail. Okay, so we're going to pass in the form that we created that has our defaults, and it's going to be bound to product form. We're going to import our Twitter Bootstrap 2.0 junk, so it's going to be laid out correctly. Then we have this @main. Remember, we're going to call that @main template. We pass it what should appear in the title. So if we go back here, you can see that the title is a string that's passed in, and it just gets referred to here. Okay, and then you have this syntax with the second argument is the content, and that corresponds here to the stuff in the block. Whoops, stuff in the block. Okay, so that's what's the content, and then if we look at main.scala, that gets inserted right here. Okay, so think on that for a minute, and I think it'll be pretty obvious to you. So what do we want? Well, we got to start having our crazy Twitter Bootstrap stuff. So we got a container class, we got a well class inside that. We have our create product title. Then we have our form. So let's just go back so we can see, okay, there's our navbar, that's from the main, and then here's our container and our well, that's coming from our product create.scala.html, and then inside it, and then here's our h3 create product, and then inside it, here's our form. Okay, so we can see here we're going to use the play @form, and we're going to pass it the controller method that needs to be invoked when someone submits the form, which is going to be the save method in the product class. We're going to pass it the class attribute that we want associated with this form, which is form horizontal, which is a Twitter Bootstrap thing. And then we have our input fields where we access particular fields in our model, which is an instance of a product but wrapped in this forms thing. And we can provide placeholders and descriptions and all these kind of stuff as optional arguments. Then we have our HTML code to actually say whether we're going to submit it, okay, which will invoke this particular controller method, or we can have the cancel method, which is just a link back to the home page, and we don't do anything. Okay, so you look at this. Okay, so what I suggest you do as you're trying to understand this is you look at the play code, and then you go back here and you view the source. That's not the right source. You view the source. Let me bring up a fresh one. Okay, and here's the actual HTML that's generated by that code, the @form Scala data HTML stuff. So this is the interaction between, and then if furthermore you can go back to the Div Shot and look at your mock-up here. Okay, so you've got kind of three things that you're juggling back and forth as you're trying to understand. This is the target code that you want. This is the actual code that you created, and then this is the way the actual code was actually laid out. So I think if you go back and forth between these three things, then you'll be you won't get too lost, and you'll be able to diagnose problems that you have pretty quickly. Okay, so let's look. So let's say that we filled out this form, and we click the submit button. That means that Play will say, okay, I know what you want to do. You want to go to this save method inside product. And so we'll go to the save method inside product, and we have this bind from request to make a new instance of the product class. Check to see if it has errors. If it has errors, we'll go back and re-render the form with the error messages. Otherwise, we'll create the instance of the product, we'll save it out, and we'll go back to the home page. Okay, so pretty straightforward. And we'll go through one other example just so we could create one of these. We got two of these. That's kind of unfortunate. They have different primary keys. As you can see, the primary key, if you look at the bottom, if you look down here, after I go up here, you can see this has a primary key of 3. Okay, and then if we go to here, you can see that has a primary key of 2. And unfortunately, I didn't name the product IDs different, so you can't see. We could fix that if we wanted. So we call that one 03 if we wanted to. And then you can see that if you look down here again, you can see the primary key has stayed the same. It's 3, but now we have our product ID being more similar. Okay, let's say we wanted to edit one of these things. Again, we can view the source. Okay, and we've got this form. We've got the action product/3. Okay. We'll go back to and we'll see that in a second. And then the rest of it basically looks the same as it was before. Okay, but what does product/3 mean? Well, that's a route. Let's go back to our routes file. And it turns out that if we're saying post product/3, okay, then what we're going to invoke is the controller product update. Okay, and we're going to pass back the value of the URL, which in our case is 3, as being the primary key associated with it. So if we go to product update, okay, what we do is we bind the new values of the product instance, check for errors, and then we call update with that primary key to save out the results, and then we go back to the home page. Okay, so it's all really, kind of uses the same paradigm throughout, where we have a page that we're going to use to display information, or page which we're going to use to create a new instance. And then we have a page that we're going to use when we have to display a pre-existing instance and allow people to update it. Okay. The only other, the other, I guess, little thing of note with this update is there is this delete button. Okay. So if we view source, what you can see is down near the end, we've got this delete, and that's a link that is product / the primary key with a /delete. And if we go to routes, we can see that we have this route where if you call get, which is the kind of the link with a product and a primary key and /delete, we're going to go to the controller method delete in the product class, pass it the ID. So let's go back here, and you can see delete. We're going to find that instance and call delete on it. and then go back to the route. Okay, and so you can kind of click through the code, press the delete button, and convince yourself that actually things worked as they should. Okay, so hopefully now you've got a sense for the kind of flow of control in the application, how things go back and forth between the view, and then the routing is used to decide where in the controller things should, be invoked, or which aspect of the control, which method in the controller should be invoked. When you invoke the method in the controller, it actually basically manipulates the model, either retrieving data or saving out new data to it. Okay, last thing is testing. So if we go to here, we can do a Control D to get out of this, and we can invoke test. And what you can see is we invoke all these tests and they all pass, which is kind of a good thing. And so the question is, how do you create tests? Okay, well, we've seen how to create controller tests, we've seen how to create model tests. How do we create tests for the view? And they look as follows. Okay, we've got this standard thing which we're going to do. I'll show you first for the index page or the main page. We've got this kind of junk at the top which establishes a new, fresh running instance of the play system. And then we have this public invoke. And what we're going to do first is we're going to create an instance of one of these Fluent pages. And in the case of testing the index page, we're going to create one of these down here. And we have to pass it this browser object which gets passed in. And we're going to pass it a port which has to correspond to the port that's used up here. So this is, it has to be the same number in each case. Otherwise, we're not going to be invoking the right fake instance of the application. And then we can call a browser goto to get to the this particular page, retrieve it kind of in our fake testing environment. And then we can call this homepage is@at function to see whether we're at the page that we want. And then if we want, we can click a link, or we can go to, we can invoke another method of that particular page to go someplace else. So let's look at that index page to see what it looks like. It's pretty straightforward. We call it index page. We have to extend this thing called Fluent page. And we have a constructor for it which takes this WebDriver object, which will pass up to the superclass, and it will do whatever it wants to do with it. And we'll also pass it the port so that we can construct this a URL object, or just a string which represents the URL. And the URL is basically always going to be localhost, in the case of the home page, plus the port number. So we construct that URL, we save it around so that when we invoke this particular method, which is the getURL method, which needs to be provided or overridden, we'll return the correct URL. If we want to check to see whether we're at the page that we think we should be at, then an easy way to do that is to use the JUnit_assert method to make sure that the title of the page equals what we expect it to be. And so what I recommend is when you're writing your pages, you make each page have a unique title so that it's very easy to test to make sure that you're in the location that you want to be. And then I just showed an example of a method that you could define to invoke a certain behavior on a particular page. So one of the things you can do from the home page is go to the new, click the new warehouse button. And so you can see that's pretty simple to state in this testing framework. You just say click new warehouse button, and then once we've done that, you can see to make sure that we've gone from a page which was the home page to a new page with the title create warehouse. Okay, so this is what we're doing basically is we're defining a class which encapsulates the behavior associated with the home page. Okay, in this class here, we're going to encapsulate the behavior associated with the page used for creating products. Okay, and we have the same constructor. We've got to figure out what the URL should look like. We've got to decide, override this method which is used to make sure that we are on the page that we want, and then we provide any additional methods that we want to kind of test the behavior that should be associated with this page. When you're on the create product page, basically the thing that you want to do is make a new product, and so I have the code here that fills out the fields associated with that form. with data, sample data, and then I click the, I find the submit field that has the ID create, and then I invoke that submit, and then as a result we hope that we have created a product. Okay, so let's go through the test just for that as well. I'm going to stay with product for all of this stuff. So let's test the product create page. So we're going to create a new kind of fake play application that's running. We're going to write this invoke method, which is going to be passed in a browser. So we'll create one of these product create pages, okay, in a pretty simple way. We'll create a home page, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the product page, okay, and then we're going to check to make sure that we are actually at the product page that we want to be. We're going to define a string called new test product. We're going to make a new product using that ID. Then we're going to check to make sure that as a result of doing that, we've now gone back to the home page. Okay? And on that home page, we're going to check to make sure that that page source includes this ID, which we're going to use as kind of a proxy to assume, to determine that we've actually created that new product. There's a lot of other ways we could do it. We could go into the database at this point and check to make sure that that product exists. All right, so there's a lot of different ways to deal with this. Okay, I think that's enough to kind of get you started understanding the views. Again, I think you're going to want to read through this source. There's other places, other things you can look at to see more complicated kinds of things. But it all basically follows this same style. And I think that you'll find it's pretty straightforward to implement your views in your system once you get the hang of it. And enjoy, and I'll talk to you soon.